So this next topic is something that's been requested by one of my students, actually. Hopefully this is something that is not too simple, but also doesn't get too technical. We're going to talk a little bit about phasing, phase cancellation, and hopefully show you what to be looking out for, how to approach the concept both creatively and technically, and maybe get into some creative examples of, like, phase cancellation in the wild, I'll say. So what I have here are just two instances of Ableton's operator synth, and they're just going to be playing sine waves, just pure old sine waves. I'm going to put in a note. We're going to put in the note G2 because that's where my mouse was. I'm going to pull this down here. If I play them right now, we don't really hear anything special. We just hear a tone. If I turn this off, we hear the same exact tone, but it's quieter. Now, this has to do with a little bit of maths, which we're going to have to jump over here for. I apologize if this gets too technical, but hopefully it is not going to be the end of the world. So let's look at this horizontal line as a representation of the wave that's being sent out to your speaker cone. We're going to have an upper bound and a lower bound, which I'm going to mark in red. The upper bound is going to be here. And then the lower bound is going to be here. Now, I'm going to mark these with some numbers. I'm going to call this 0. I'm going to call this positive 1. I'm going to call this negative 1. Now, for any given sound, we can treat its oscillation as if it exists on this plane. And what we're doing here is we're taking a top-down view of a circular thing. That's what a vibration or a wave is. It's technically an emanation. You could look at it as, like, if we took this 0 line and I draw like a circle, 0 is right here, basically. This is 0. And then here is negative 1, and here is positive 1. As we rotate through the circle, this is also 0. These 2 points are 0 and 0. They're technically not, but I want you to start to think about what happens if we take this as 1, 0 line, and then we just take this bottom half right here and we fold it the other direction. We're just kind of chopping off right there. We're saying, okay, we're going to take this and we're going to fold it backwards. Now, that looks very familiar. That's what we're about to draw here. This wave starts with no energy, no power. It begins its rotation. It's climbing up, it hits the maximum amplitude, and then it circles back down, comes back down as if it was coming around towards here. Then it reaches its maximum negative amplitude, aka the polar opposite, comes back up, comes back down, and then eventually it comes back to the 0 point. We can do maths on this. Now, if I take this away, and let's say I have something that's not exactly full amplitude. Let's say, like, right here is positive 0.5, this is negative 0.5, right? So let's just have a nice little sine wave that's only existing from 0.5 to negative 0.5. And let's add in another wave that has the exact same phase relationship. It starts and ends at the exact same point. As you can see, apart from my bad handwriting, they're the exact same position when we're going up and down. Now, if we take a poll or a sample of this information at a single given point, which we'll mark as right here, this is what we'll call x. Now, at the moment x, we have 0.5, and then we have 0.5. Can anyone tell me what x is equal to? Just some simple arithmetic, basic addition. What is 0.5 plus 0.5? X at this point equals 1. And that's literally what's happening here. On a maths level, that's what's happening. If we jump over here and we look at these three number values, this sine wave, minus 12. This sine wave, minus 12. So if they are summing together minus 12 plus minus 12, this is going to be where the math gets kind of weird. What do you think is going to happen when you add together minus 12 decibels and minus 12 decibels? Now, remember, it's not specifically that you're doing minus 12. I want you to think back to this, to the waveform. We're taking a sample at a point, and we're saying at that point, whatever that specific value is, we're adding it to itself. And when you are doing that here, it's the same exact thing as essentially having the negative value. It's 0. Not quite, not quite. It's actually minus 6. Yeah, 0.5 plus, so minus 6 dB. Exactly, Lefty, exactly. Now, this is where it gets a little bit unintuitive, right? Because we are counting up to 0. We're going up the negative number line, not in the positive number line. We're doing negative numbers up until 0, from negative infinity up to 0. So, minus 12 plus minus 12, it sounds like it should equal minus 24, but again, we're adding towards 0. So we're getting half of the volume reduction away from 0, and half of minus 12, or twice the volume, is minus 6. Technically, it's minus 5.98 because of some floating point math. Don't worry about it. This is just the same thing as saying minus 6. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into one of these operators, and I'm going to adjust the phase of this to be 50% out of phase, aka 180 degrees out of phase. Solo this one, minus 12. Solo this one, minus 12. What's going to happen? The same thing, right? We're doing minus 12 plus minus 12, whereas we're doing it on the waveform level, which we'll get into what's actually happening in a second. But why wouldn't it be the exact same? Let's find out. Oh, that's strange. This is outputting negative infinity to silence, but we can see that there's signal here. If I solo, we can hear them, but together we can't. Now, what's happening is we have our initial wave that is going from 0 to minus 0.5 down to, or positive 0.5 down to negative 0.5. And now let's do the same thing. Now, instead of it being like this, we've changed the phase. Basically we've taken this point right here and we've moved this back to the point where now this goes down. Whoops. This goes down. And then it crosses up. And it comes back together. So, if we are doing maths at, say, this point right here, which we'll call y, at the position y, we have 0.5 plus negative 0.5. 0.5 minus 0.5 is the same exact thing as 0. Now, we're starting to see the interconnectedness of phase and amplitude, specifically. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze and I'm going to flatten these sine waves into audio so we can actually take a look at the waveforms, right? Zoom in here, and now we can actually physically see what I was talking about. As this wave is coming up, this wave is coming down in the exact opposite amount. If we had these at maximum volume, so we can see the waves kind of pushing, like so. I'm just gonna make these close to about the same. Okay. So now it's even more clear what's going on. We have this zero crossing right here. We have this other zero crossing right here. And we can see this an identical yet opposite kind of reaction in the wave. Now, what I'm gonna do is I am going to start playing around with the phase of this secondary operator, or oscillator, excuse me. I'm going to use track delay for this right here. Now, 1 millisecond, we already have sound. Getting louder. At 5, it's not exactly silent, but you can hear how it grows and shrinks based on the phase relationship of the two waves. Now I'm going to go a step further, and we're going to create a consistent separation between them. I'm going to detune this by just -5 cents. So let me set this to -5, and then I will consolidate this as a new audio file. Now, if we jump back to the very beginning of the waveform, all the way back here to the start, these two waves begin in exactly opposite positions. But let's see what happens right here. Well, it looks like the peaks and troughs are not exactly perfectly lining up. See this zero crossing? It's almost there. It's almost there. Let's jump forwards a little bit. What's happening right around here? What's at this zero crossing? Oh! The zero crossings aren't really lining up anymore. What happens if we jump down all the way over here? Oh, now they're really far off. There's a zero crossing on the upper wave. There's a zero crossing on the lower wave. So now they are going to be coming in and out of phase just because of the consistent difference between their pitches. You can kind of see how this one's scrolling. It's really cool, right? If I take this, I tune this back up 5 semitones, and then I pitch this up 2 semitones, you will hear that there is still phase cancellation happening, but not as much. Do you hear that kind of flutter tone in between the two sine waves? That is, in fact, phase cancellation. I'm going to take both of these, make sure they're not warped, and then I'm going to pitch them both down an octave. I'm going to pitch them down another octave. There is a consistent level of phase cancellation between these two waves. Suddenly bass indeed. But the only reason why I'm doing bass is because those waves happen slow enough that you can hear the phase cancellation. If I go in and I grab an operator, I set this to a saw wave, I can do the exact same thing. Hear that wah 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 thing? That is the phase cancellation. There's still phase cancellation there, but it's not as obvious because of the relationship of the harmonics. So each interval is going to have its own special bit of phase cancellation happening, and the more harmonics a sound has, the more their upper partials will actually phase cancel with each other. Now, this is where we can start to talk about the practical applications, right? Because this is all concept. This is all theoretical. We have physical demonstrations of it, but at the end of the day, it's still just theory. How the fuck do you use this in your music, right? Well, let's grab a couple of drum sounds, right? Just a couple of drums. I want to make a kick drum, for example, but I don't want to just make a kick drum. I want to layer a couple of kick drums, right? Let's take this kick. Let's take that kick. Let's find one more. Let's take that kick. Now, if I play these all together, it should just sound fine, right? Doesn't quite sound fine. Sounds kind of weird. Well, if I take this, I'm going to go back to my I.O., and I'm going to route this from the resampling track, which is going to take from the master, and I'm just going to record this out. Now, do you see this part of the waveform right here? Do you see that on any of these? Because I sure don't. So what's happening? What's happening to create all this stuff? What's going on here? Well, let's jump back in and look at the actual waveform. So, in this moment right here, what's happening? Well, this one's moving up, this one's moving up, this one's moving down, and this one's moving up. So we have 3 waveforms that are moving up and 1 moving down. So what's happening in a vertical slice in this one moment is that we are adding together, say, 0.25, 0.46, negative 0.13, and positive 0.6. We're going to end up with a number that is all of these added together, so there's a little bit of destructive interference here. And if we go down to this point, this is very high up, this is very high up, this is almost all the way at the bottom, and this is very high up. So now this is going to end up on our resampling track, reducing the amount of information. Oh, this is actually our resampled sound. So that's actually even clearer. These 2 are adding together, whereas this one is subtracting away, and we get something that's kind of middling, kind of stuck halfway between both of the waveforms. How would we fix this? Well, one thing you can do is you can start to play with the phase of these waveforms. For example, if I cut this right here, and I start moving this back, now the peaks and troughs are much closer together. This trough is next to this trough, it's next to this trough. This peak is next to this peak, is next to this peak. Now things are lined up a little bit closer together. But there are still going to be points where you have like these moments right here, and that's kind of strange. As you can see, there are still going to be points where things are not exactly lining up. And even when this thing has, if I zoom in, this still has a little bit of information. I can go in, I can actually pull this up, and you can see there's still actual signal information right here. Do we need that to be added into the maths of all of these other waveforms? Probably not. So, another thing you can do is start to trim out unnecessary parts of a wave. You can fade this in. And now we're really starting to sculpt together all of the different portions of this sound to get something that's probably a little bit cleaner. Let me pull this down here for now. And then let's resample from this one. Let's compare these two. So, we got much more definition on this section and slightly less definition here. So there's probably a peak and a trough happening. You can kind of see that right there. And the next stage would be to either go into the signal, start detuning it ever so slightly, or using a frequency shifter to start to tune them around. This is why people say you should, at the very least, try to tune your drums to the key of your track. Another common example of this is like you have a kick drum and you're layering in a sub bass underneath that kick drum, right? So if I get like an 808 kick drum or something right here, if I look at these waves, there can be moments, thankfully they look to be in about the same frequency, but like at this moment right here, what's gonna happen at this moment? This kick is moving down, the sub is moving up. These are actually going to cancel each other out. Now, if I tune this kick right here to the key of this, or vice versa, to my ears, it sounds like the kick, or the 808, is a little bit off. That sounds like it's in the same key. And now, if I go in and look, I should be able to adjust these waves so that the peaks and troughs generally line up. Fade in like so. You can see the peaks and troughs are much closer together. They're still not perfect, and you could keep playing with this, but that is a good way of creating a bit of space and accounting for the phase of the different parts of your sound. And you'll end up with something that's more than a little bit cleaner. You can see obviously that the volumes are not quite the same, but there isn't nearly as much of a diminishment of the wave. You can see like right here, we basically have the full volume of this, and it's not being destroyed by this kick drum. And like Shroom had mentioned before, you can also, if you really, really want to be anal retentive, go in and manually fix the resampled wave. I find myself doing this quite a bit. It's obviously not the best way of going about it, but it does lead to some pretty nice results. Other things that can be important about phase cancellation is how it leads to stereo image, this sensation of difference between the two channels, right? So if I have some sort of wave, and I take this wave and I detune it against itself. I'm going to put this up about 5 cents, put this down about 5 cents. That is the phase cancellation that we're hearing between the two waves. If I go look at the stereo, there's not quite anything happening. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new group. Actually, I'm just going to duplicate this. I'm going to delete one of each of these. Now I'm going to pan this one left, pan this one right. Now, our ears are able to pick up on the difference between the phases, even if there isn't as much phase cancellation between the waves. Now, if I go ahead and I mono this, it still has that phase cancellation, but it isn't until we collapse the two channels together, we sum the information in the left and right channels together, that we end up with that feeling of phase cancellation. What we just did right here is basically how the unison effect works. If I turn on unison, right now, if I have this on 2 and set this to 5 cents, I've just made the exact same thing as this. I just made the exact same thing, except the pan is completely centered on both. But if I start increasing the spread amount, it pans them away from each other. As you play around with different unison modes and different unisons amounts, you will hopefully start to see where the phase cancellation is present in all of these processes. One thing that I want to point out is the re-triggering of these oscillators. This is the same exact thing as the first example I showed you, where I had the sine wave and then the sine wave that was detuned by 5 cents. They start the same exact position. They start the same, and then hear that? It kind of splits apart. And that's what this right here is trying to really show you, is that it starts identical, but over time there's a little bit of inconsistency and inconsistency until you get into multiple different waves like that. That little phasery sound, if I had, hold on. I have Spectre open. There you go. That right there. That is the phase cancellation. That right there is the clear image, the clear sign of phase cancellation. Yeah, now you can see it. You can see it'll be repeating. No matter which note you play, because the phase cancellation is going to be the same, no matter what. What does that mean for all of these effects that deal with the phase of a signal, like a phaser? What happens if I just throw a phaser on here and we look at it? We see this little M shape, and we're seeing more stereo information. What about a flanger? Oh, this looks much more similar to what we're dealing with the unison. And if you look up here, there is fluctuation in the volume. You look over here, fluctuation in the stereo image. There's phase cancellation going on. See this pumping up and down? That's the left and right channel fighting against each other. Cone filters do the same exact thing. If I just put an LFO on this, not adding as much stereo, but you can see that there is a repeated pattern here in how the voices are phase canceling against each other. When I do stereo, what it does is it says that, okay, one channel should be cone filtered in a positive way, the other should be filtered in a negative way, and you get something like this. See right here what it's doing to the wave. The actual waveform becomes more consistent because there's less drastic changes happening to the oscillations, but if we sum that down to mono, all of a sudden it'll look the same exact thing. Just less motion. Because we've now completely cut off the difference between the signals. So, as you are playing around with your sounds, think about how important they are. The more important the sound is, the more damaging phase cancellation is. Other important places to think about phase is going to be in microphone recordings. I'm going to record it on my phone and on my my microphone at the same time. And then we're going to look at how those two waves interact. And then I'm going to record the same line twice and see how that interacts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to record myself speaking into both of these at the same time. Alrighty then. This is me, Musar, speaking into both my microphone and into my cell phone. There is a little bit of distance between where the microphone is in relationship to my face and a different amount of distance between where my microphone on my phone and my face are at. That really was not well spoken. I apologize, but I'm now going to stop these recordings, upload my phone recording to my computer, and we're going to compare them. So now I'm going to jump back. Oh, actually, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to record myself saying the same line twice. This is me speaking directly into my microphone. This is me speaking directly into my microphone. Let's listen to these two together. Alrighty then. This is me, Musar, speaking into both my microphone and into my cell phone. There is a little bit of distance between where the microphone is in relationship to my face and a different amount of distance between where my microphone and on my phone. Oh yeah. Now, watch what happens when I try to line them up perfectly, because we can get them to be just about perfect. Right about there. Alrighty then. This is me, Musar, speaking into both my microphone and into my cell phone. Notice how all of a sudden it sounds locked in? It's not perfect because my timing's not exact, but that weird phasey effect we had at first. Alrighty then. That is phase cancellation. Our ears are detecting this amount of distance, this 39 milliseconds, alrighty then, as just one sound. I could go in and I could pan this one to the left and this one to the right. Alrighty then. This is me, Musar. Feels really weird. And again, if we try to line it up. Alrighty then. This is me, Musar. Starts to kind of lean into both my microphone and into my cell phone. Right? Super cool, I think. Now, what I want you to do is listen to the difference between that and this, where I'm not recording the same take twice. I'm recording two takes of the same line. This is me speaking directly into my microphone. Line that up a little bit better, I feel like. But this is me speaking directly into my microphone. Yeah. Now that's some interesting phase relationships, because I can't say the same thing the same way more than once. It is almost physically impossible for you to repeat the same line, the same sentence, the same melody, the same musical thing without fail, with perfect reproduction. There will always be these slight inconsistencies. Now, I can go in and I can start to decide, well, where do I want those inconsistencies to happen? Where do I want them to go away? Here, I want the ending to be maybe more consistent. Let's see what that changes for the intro. This is me speaking directly into my microphone. That's pretty close. This is me speaking directly into my... But you can tell that some of these lines are not quite together. Now, if I pan this hard left and hard right, this is me speaking directly into my microphone. Ooh. Now that sounds pretty wide, pretty cool. There's a lot of difference inherent in both of these recordings. And that difference is what makes our ears perceive this as stereo. Personally, I find this to be a bit too wide. I would prefer if I had one additional recording of me saying this thing and I placed that one in the center. But this is why, in my opinion, printing things to audio is better than leaving things in MIDI. Because printing things down to audio, you see more. You see these relationships, and you can see, we don't even have to listen to see that there is a big difference between these two waves. You can see where the peaks and the troughs are, how they interact. And even though it's the same basic wave shape, there's some subtle differences in how I said them. This is basically the same shape, right? You can see this downward slope right here, repeating at almost the same rate, but it's not quite exact. As you get more comfortable with your productions, I encourage you to experiment with what I will call analog emulation through sampling. Let's go back a little bit to operator, right? Because we talked about how operator has this phase retrigger. I'm going to do a melody twice, and I guess I'll do it 3 times. I'll have this right here. Now I'll duplicate that. So what we're going to do is we're going to automate it on here. Now all I need to do is just freeze, flatten. Now we'll call this analog. We'll call this digital. I'm going to split this off into 4 different, actually I guess 2 is fine. So now we have the 2 digital recordings and the 2 big, air quotes, analog recordings. Now, what happens when we play these together? Ooh, what's going on there? Notice how each one of these hits is hitting a little bit differently? Like right here at the beginning, you can see how the phase offsets are different, even though it's the same pitch. Whereas together it's just louder, but now watch what happens when I pan them wide. Do you notice how the digital one no longer sounds wide? The analog one sounds wide. The digital one, even though they're hard panned left and right, they just sound like one recording. They just sound like one thing. That gets back to what's going on here. They have the same phases, and so when we sum them together, we're just doing the very same thing we did at the very beginning of this entire lecture. Whether you're talking about digital instruments, whether you're talking about recorded instruments, whether you're talking about your human voice, whether you're talking about Foley, the more you allow for differences between the waveforms, points where they're not identically lining up the way we expect them to, the more interest you can get. Now, if something is super important, you might not want this, but as you're going into creating depth in your mix, this is going to do you better than just duplicating things. Recording something once and duplicating it to create difference in the signal will almost always, I want to repeat this, almost always will lead to a worse result than just recording something twice. Period. In my experience, 3 takes where each one is recorded and processed less is going to sound better than 1 take, duplicated process in a different way. Let's say you want to make a really cool serum bass, right? You can still use this. You don't have to go in and do a lot of crazy, modulation, unison stuff. Watch this. Watch this. I want you to check this out. We're just going to make a quick little wub, but we're going to make this wub more wide. Give this a little bit of FM from B. But I'm going to make sure that, like, if I turn the randomness off, it's gonna sound the exact same every time, right? I don't want that. So I'm gonna max out the phase randomness on the carrier signal. And go ahead and give it, let's say like a high peak. Back down this way. All right, so let's go ahead and give it a little bit of distortion. Maybe some OTT. All right, cool. So give this then wub. Cool. So now what I want to do is play a big bass note. Let's get 0. And then I just want to reset this every so often. Be a little bit shorter just to create some division. Now I'm going to duplicate the patch, and I'm going to get rid of all this. I'm going to get a rounded sub, and I'm going to do this. So now I'm going to freeze and flatten this audio. I'm going to duplicate this, and now I'm just going to take every second one, and I'm going to move it back, like so. And we're just going to create a bit more engaging of a signal. These down a little bit. Now, ooh, notice how now there's a couple of different hits there. What happens if I pan this 25 to the left and this one 25 to the right? So now it's not super, super panned, but... Ooh, by exploiting this exact thing that I am talking about with phase cancellation, we're creating interest. We're creating different layers to the sound. And we can combine these together, process them as one thing. Yeah, and now you're getting stereo information from something that we didn't apply any stereo processing to. I want to be clear on that. We didn't do a single bit of unison, chorus, flanging, phasing, nothing. But we're getting stereo and a bunch of different new timbres from the phase cancellation happening to these two different hits. You can go as far with this as you want. Like we could even go through, add in 2 more like here. And then all of a sudden, now we could say pan these all the way hard left and right. Ooh. Now we have this super wide thing, and it's not necessarily going to be easier to manage in terms of the vertical arrangement of your song, but it does make it a lot easier to see how things are acting. Hopefully that makes sense. If you're watching this at home on YouTube, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell thing, do all the YouTube stuff. Check me out on Patreon, patreon.com/MusarMakes. I will say, if you're Patreon patron and you want to get private lessons with me, you do get a discount based on the tier of patron you're at, so double check that. Check out my Twitch stream. That's where we do this every Thursday. Check out my Twitter. Can't think of any other big things to talk about, so I guess this will be where we cut the video.